IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That's Trevor. I'm Bryan, and we are ready to talk some Notre Dame football, sort of. Today is one of my favorite shows of the offseason. It really is. I love doing this, and we honestly do this more for my enjoyment than anyone else's. We always try to do things that we think you guys are going to enjoy, and I think you guys are going to enjoy this, but I personally love talking about the all-opponent teams, and so we're going to do that today. We're going to break down the all-opponent teams for Notre Dame's opponents for offense, defense, and then as part of that, after we break down the all-opponent teams, we will then talk about what Notre Dame players would be on the list if we included Notre Dame as that 13th team. Have some fun with that. We'll go offense, we'll go defense, and then also today we are kicking off our season preview series where we will kind of break down and preview the opponents that Notre Dame is going to face in order. So today we're going to start with Miami. We're going to preview Miami. This is not meant to be a preview of the matchup per se, but more so an attempt to let you teach you all, not teach you all, but like just open up the conversation and for those who aren't aware of the opponents to continue to teach you more about it and go over it. So every opponent it's going to come across as more of a favorable type of preview. And last year, there was a lot of people that would be like, well, you guys must think this team's really good. I'm like, I think you're kind of misunderstanding what we're trying to do here. This isn't a matchup preview. This is simply trying to talk about the opponent, discuss the strengths, weaknesses, things like that, expectations of the opponent. And we're going to have that conversation today. And we're going to go in order. So we'll talk Miami this week. We'll talk Texas A&M next week. And then just go in order, Purdue, Arkansas, Boise, and in that order, all the way down to Stanford at the end of the year. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And then once we finally wrap that up, that's when we'll do our season predictions preview show, just to give you guys a little bit of a timeline on how that's going to go. So that's what today's show is. And Trev, I think this is a fun show because it gives fans a sense of, obviously knowledge of the players that Notre Dame is going to be facing this year. But then also, as you go through this, one of the things that we're going to talk about as part of it is like, boy, this is a really strong position group. And we'll primarily focus on the first team, but we'll mention second team guys. We'll talk about some sleepers. But with this, some of it was hard to come up with who was on first team because, boy, these guys are really good. And how do I leave this guy off the first team? And sometimes it was like, I can't believe I have to put this guy on the first team because it's just not a strong position group. And that's what makes it really fun to kind of study the team and look at the team and prepare for the season, because it's like you may say, hey, this is a position group that's not as strong for Notre Dame, and it's even more concerning that it's not as strong and they face really good players. Or, yeah, this may not be a strength for Notre Dame, but I don't know that we're going to be able to see that in its full entirety during the regular season because the opponents aren't really strong there. And it's good to know those type of things because you go in the postseason and you start facing teams that are good in those areas, and you're like, they're going to have to find some answers for this. So it's going to be a lot of fun today, Trev. This is your first time doing an all-opponent team, so I'm very much looking forward to it and having some conversations about the best players Notre Dame's going to face this year.
I'm excited that this is the conversation we're having today. I think it's going to provide it's going to shed some light on some of the things that we've touched on over the course of the offseason so far. I'm pumped to start diving into the opponent previews. Obviously, this is more of a hot topic team for me than it might be for some others, but it starts to paint some of the picture of where people can start to get some of these opinions. Because a lot of times throughout the offseason, a lot of people just kind of remember logo on the helmet, the success they had last season, where does it leave you now? So I'm excited to talk about everything today, man. I'm ready to jump into it. We got a lot to cover.
So we will start off on the offensive side of the ball, Trev, and talk about – we're going to go sort of by position group. So we'll go quarterback. We have one quarterback, one running back, 3 receivers, 1 tight end, 2 tackles, 2 guards, and a center. I'm not a huge fan of doing just 5 linemen. I kind of like to try to have some type of actual positional – aspects to it. If we were ever going to do a where it's just the 5 best linemen and not tackles, guards, and centers, this would have been the year. And we'll explain that when we get to the O-line section. But that's going to be the order we break it down. We'll talk about the guys we both have on first team. There's some we have the same, some we don't. There's a couple where I don't have a guy on first or second team that Trevor has on first and vice versa. So we're going to have some fun with that. It's going to be a really interesting breakdown. And we're going to start off at quarterback, Trevor, because the big picture thing is my first team guy is not on either of your first two teams. Your first team guy is not on my first or second team. We both picked the same sleeper. And there's two ways to look at that. One is we have a very different opinion of who the best quarterbacks are. But the other way to look at it is, and I think this is actually more accurate, is this actually there's a lot of good quarterbacks on the schedule this year that you could argue for multiple guys being the first team quarterback. And you can make a case for a guy that we both have second team being the first team quarterback. And I would be willing to say that I don't know that the guy that we both picked preseason is going to be the guy at the end of the season, and we're going to have some fun with that. But let's first start off at quarterback, Trev, and I went with Blake Horvath. And I know this is going to be something that some people look at and say, how could you have a Navy quarterback on there? But I have a couple of responses to that. Number one is he's the most dynamic player that Notre Dame is going to face. And he's, in my opinion, the toughest matchup that Notre Dame is going to face. I love the production. If you look at the production he had last season, he passed for 1,353 yards. He rushed for 1,246 yards. He averaged 7.1 yards per rush, 9.7 yards per pass attempt, and had 30 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. And so there's some quarterbacks on the list that people say, well, this guy passed for more yards than this guy had total yards. I'm like, yeah, but this guy had more touchdowns than any other quarterback they're going to face this year. And when you look at combined touchdowns. So when I look at Blake Horvath, I also look at a guy that led his team to much greater success than they had the previous season. The other thing that kind of opened my eyes up about Blake Horvath is because sometimes with Navy quarterbacks, you can just it's a system guy. The results are due to the system. But when you look at how much Navy struggled offensively during that about a month period where he was banged up and injured, and you're like, okay, so his injury happened during the Charlotte game. First 5 games of the year, Navy scored 49, 38, 56, 41 points, and then they scored 51 in that game against Charlotte. They had 437, 409, 566, 452, 463 yards. They went for 288 against Charlotte. And if you watch that game, they had a lot of short fields. That partly factored into that. And then came the Notre Dame game. And we remember talking about that before the game, how Blake Horvath deals with the hand injury. And you saw Navy the rest of the way until he got better. 14 points, 10 points, 28 points, 0 points, 34 points, 31 points, 21 points against Oklahoma. Well, the thing that changed during that period of time is, he was out, started to get a little bit healthier. He was very banged up. He tried to battle through, played against Rice, was ineffective, played against South Florida, was ineffective, got hurt again against Tulane after one pass, missed the rest of that game, missed the East Carolina game, finally came back for Army a little bit more healthy, and he was outstanding against Army. And in the last 2 games, he rushed for 351 yards in the last 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games against Army and against Oklahoma, and also completed 11 of 21 passes in those games. So I look at the production is there, the fact that the team was so. Oh, and by the way, their record, all 3 losses were in the time frame in which he was dealing with the hand injury. They were unbeaten outside of that, including a very good win over Memphis, a very good Memphis team. They had a win over a 12-win Army team, and they had a win over Oklahoma in the bowl game. And I think you take him off that team, there's no way they're as good as they were. And so that's where I look at Blake Horvath and the dynamic playmaking ability, the production, and the fact that he put that team on his shoulders and said, hey, we're going to do something here this year. And when he was healthy, they were pretty dynamic. So that's why I have Blake Horvath as my first-team quarterback. Trev, who is your first-team quarterback?
So I love all the points that you brought up, and along those similar lines, that's why I have my quarterback, the first-team quarterback.
About the type of team they were when he was healthy?
Versus not. And that's Eli Holstein at Pitt. Now, I know might be a hot topic. I've seen some people in the chat talk about Jade Maeva. That's a player that didn't make mine or Brian's list.
I barely considered him, to be honest with you.
Same.
Because if you only saw him play against Notre Dame, you have a very different opinion of him than if you saw him play against everybody else they played last year.
Yes. But my first-team all-opponent quarterback is Eli Holstein. Let me explain. He had one of the better starts to the season for a young quarterback nobody talked about. He had 3 passing touchdowns in 5 consecutive games to start the year. First-time starter, first 5 games, he had 15 touchdown passes, 3 interceptions. mobility wise, he reminds me of like a CJ Carr. He's not a runner. They're not going to design runs for him, but he is athletic enough to where he can make plays and escape the pocket if he has to. Last season, he had 81 carries for 328 yards, 3 touchdowns. But in a similar light to Blake Horvath, the Panthers started out last season 7-0. Once Eli Holstein got hurt and wasn't himself from earlier in the season, they lost 6 straight games and wasn't even competitive games. Like, you go back through and you look at their schedule. First couple games, they're dropping 55, 28, 38, 73 against Youngstown State, but it's 73 points. They had 34 on the road against North Carolina. They had a close home win against Cal. They dropped 41 in a big win over Syracuse. And then once he got hurt and wasn't fully healthy, they scored 25, 19, 29, and then 23. And so I look at this offense, and for some of the good supporting roles that they have, we're going to talk about a Pitt running back later. But I like what Eli Holstein brings to the table. He's a big-bodied kid. He's 6'4". He's 225. He's still young. For him, it's a big question of if he can stay healthy. And there's arguments to be made for a handful of quarterbacks to be on this list. But for me, when I go back through and look what he meant for his team, he has a year of progression to step up with. One of the things that kind of made me differ from not putting Blake Horvath on this list is that I think that we may have seen the best of what Blake Horvath can be for Navy. I don't think we've seen the best of what Eli Holstein can be for Pitt. Now, with that being said,
so what you're saying is you're making a projection. It's
yes.
based on that's fair.
Yep. And so and now this projection could be wrong at the end of the season, barring health, barring what his supporting cast looks like at Pitt. But to start off, I went with Eli Holstein as my first team all-opponent quarterback.
My second team all-opponent quarterback is Carson Beck. Carson Beck is a guy that I considered putting first team and a guy that I considered putting not on there at all. And that really comes down to the challenge of evaluating Miami, which we'll get into later, because you don't really know what you're going to get in Carson Beck. And the Carson Beck that we saw in 2023 looked a lot different than the Carson Beck that we saw in 2024 at Georgia. Mm-hmm. In 2023 at Georgia, Carson Beck passed for 3,941 yards, averaged 9.5 yards per attempt, completed over 72% of his passes, and had a quarterback rating of 167.92. He was not a big touchdown guy. He only had 24 touchdowns. That was just kind of the nature of the offense. And had only 6 interceptions. Performed very well in some of their bigger games. Last year, however, even before the injury, you saw Carson Beck start to struggle last season. Had a completion percentage at 64.7, so that's about an 8% drop-off. Passed for 3,485 yards. The yards probably would have been a lot closer had he not got injured against Georgia or Texas, and he only had 56 yards in that game, and then didn't play against Notre Dame. So if he was averaging about, let's see here what his average was. So he was at 3,485. And if you take away the 56 from the Texas game, divide that by 12, he was around 285.7 yards per game. So if he plays 14 games, he's at 4,000 yards, which is the number of games he played the year before. So the yards were about the same. The difference is what it took to get to those yards. And in 14 games to get to 3,900 yards in 2023, he threw 417 passes. Last year, to only get to 3,485 yards, he threw 448 passes. He went from 9.5 yards per attempt to 7.8 yards per attempt, which is a very big drop-off. Like, you're dropping almost 2 whole yards per attempt. That is a far less efficient team. Touchdowns went up 4, 24 to 28, but the interceptions doubled. They went from 6 to 12. And then the rushing production was also not there. He rushed for 116 yards and 4 touchdowns. So just chain mover, some goal line stuff, some keep stuff. 116 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns to 71 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. So across the board, outside of just yards per game, his production took a big drop last year. Some issues I had with Carson Beck were I didn't think he was very good in big games, which he was better in those moments in 2023. And just like you look at the Bama game, was great in the comeback, couldn't make the throws at the end to win it, but he was part of the reason with some of his turnovers early that they were even behind. And you saw him struggle in some of those against some of those better teams that they played last season. So I look at Carson Beck and see a guy that could potentially be the best quarterback that Notre Dame faces this year. Reason he's not on there is the inconsistency, the question marks about receiver that Miami has, and we'll get into that later. But then also, I don't know where he's going to be health-wise. That's really what it boils down to. And that's why I had a hard time putting him number one. Missed all spring with an elbow injury. I don't know where he's going to be velocity-wise, timing-wise. He's missed a lot of time with receivers, and we saw how that impacted Riley Leonard last year. And so that's part of it too, is I've seen what missing an entire offseason at a new team can do to a quarterback as a passer. What Carson Beck doesn't have is the ability that Riley Leonard had to go out there and make plays with his legs if the throwing wasn't there. So that's why I have Carson Beck second team, and honestly thought about not even having him on the second team.
Yeah, reality of the situation is outside of, I believe, one quarterback at Boise State, all 11 other quarterbacks that Notre Dame will play in 2025 have not started a complete season, whether it be due to injury or stepping into the lineup late. There's a lot of heavy-hitting names, Marcel Reed, Carson Beck, guys like that. I do have a question for you, Brian. Where were you at with Maddox Madsen on this list?
Never considered him. Just looked at him, but I had C.J. Bailey ahead of him. I would have taken Jade Maeva ahead of him. I think Maddox Madsen's a nice G5 quarterback that benefited from having the most dynamic running back in the country around him last year.
Fair.
Now, he has some good weapons to work with this year. And Boise has a player on my first team or on my second team skill position, and then a guy on my first team O-line. But he's just kind of a product of, he's a nice, good G5 quarterback. If we're doing like an all group of 5 team, he'd be on there. As far as like an option, a guy that I would consider.
Sure.
But he wasn't someone that I looked at. I'd say C.J. Bailey, somebody that I looked at and thought about. And with C.J. Bailey was a lot like you were talking about with Eli Holstein. It would have been all about projection. He was both of our sleeper quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
But when I watched C.J. Bailey last year, I believe as a true freshman, and he threw for 2,400 yards, 17 touchdowns, 10 picks, rushed for 275 yards, 5 touchdowns. But he was a playmaker at times. And I thought finished the season really well against North Carolina and East Carolina. Had some really good moments against Syracuse, but he also had some freshman moments like you saw against Georgia Tech. But I actually thought very hard about putting C.J. Bailey as my first or second team quarterback. I would have considered him before I would have considered. Yeah.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, you and I see the Carson Beck situation the same. That's what held him out of my first team. Where I had a hard time was honestly keeping him on my second team because of the Blake Horvath thought.
Mm-hmm.
But I went with Carson Beck on my second team. He is, in my mind, he's the sole reason that offense is still maintaining that level of hype. There's some people that are out there that still believe that Miami's offense is going to be what it was last year. We'll dive more into that later. But Carson Beck holds a big piece of that. And so that on top of his experience, because his production took a dip, but the experience that he does have, I do put into heavy consideration there. So, yeah, I have him as my second team.
Eli Holstein was him and C.J. Bailey were my next two that I was considering for third team. And that's one thing to look at is the quarterback play that Notre Dame faces this year is much stronger than it was last year.
Yeah, for sure.
Much stronger than it was last year. So I think that factors into a little bit about what I think will be a challenge for Notre Dame's football team this year, Notre Dame's defense this year, is that I do think quarterback play is going to be better. Now, there's a lot of unproven aspects of it, but there's a lot of talent. Like I said, C.J. Bailey, Blake Horvath, Carson Beck, Eli Holstein, Marcel Reed, the Ryan Brown kid that's going to start at Purdue is not a bad football player. Taylon Green from Arkansas is a dynamic, run throw guy. And then another potential sleeper pick for me is if Dylan Lonergan can win the job at Boston College, that's another guy to keep an eye on. So the other one, obviously, who wins the quarterback job at Syracuse? That guy's going to put up numbers. But does that mean that they're the best quarterback? We're going to find that out. and we'll have a lot to say about Syracuse when we get to Syracuse preview, because the supporting cast to me is not going to be nearly as strong this year as it was for Kyle McCord last year. So that's something to keep an eye on. But Blake Horvath's my number one. Eli Holstein's your number one. Both had Carson Beck number two, and then CJ Bailey is that fourth guy. I like that one. Let's go running back, because this is another position that I think is going to be a strength of Notre Dame's opponents. There were a lot of running backs to consider, and there were some guys that you could look at and say, hey, I might have considered that guy and added him to my potential list if it wasn't for the fact that all the other guys on the board were still too good. And so that was an interesting one. That was a little bit of a challenge. I'm going with a little bit of projection on this one. And my first team running back is Le'Veon Moss from Texas A&M. You look at last year's numbers, they're not going to blow you away. He ran for over 700 yards and had, I think I'm pulling up his numbers now, he had 765 yards, 10 touchdowns, 121 carries, 6.3 yards per carry. Only played 9 games. And if you look at his production from last season, and then the 9th game that he played, he carried the ball twice for 8 yards. So if you actually look at his per game production and put that over the course of a 13-game season, you're talking about a guy, Trev, that would have rushed for over – actually, that's not correct. I did 765 or 757 times 12. I meant to divide that by 8 first to get a proper number. But if he'd have played a 12 regular season plus a 13th bowl game, you're talking about a guy that's going to rush for over 1,200 yards, averaging over 6 yards a carry. You're talking about a guy that rushed for basically 10 touchdowns in 8 games. You know, the type of production he would have had there. You're talking about a guy that's over 1,200 yards, over 16 touchdowns in a season. That's very good production. So not a huge threat in the pass game. Only caught 10 balls for 141 yards, no touchdowns. But he's a very good run. I mean, and he's the guy when A&M started kind of leaning on Notre Dame in the third and fourth quarter, he was the back that was doing a lot of that damage. Now, so a lot of guys you could have gone with. I went Desmond Reed with my second team back. He is without a doubt the best all-around back on the schedule, and it's not even close. I went with Le'Veon Moss because I think he's just a more pure runner. But Desmond Reed's a not only an impact runner, he rushed for just under 1,000 yards last season for Pitt in a team that threw the ball a lot. But he had 966 rushing yards, 5.3 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns. Not dynamic numbers, but then you look at him, he had 52 catches for 579 yards. He had a punt return for a touchdown last season. He's a dynamic all-around weapon. I don't think he's a pure every down running back, but I'll put it to you like this. If Notre Dame had to face a team with Le'Veon Moss as your number one and Desmond Reed as your rotation back, that is not a fun day for your defense. Not a fun day for your defense. Some other guys that I considered, I think Mark Fletcher from Miami is a guy that I could see sort of stepping into that role that Damian Martinez had. He's a 6'2", 220-plus pound running back, solid speed, more of a slasher than a guy that's going to make a lot of people miss. Jordan Lyle's a nice compliment to him. Those guys both were kind of on my list at running back. NC State had a freshman last year that I liked a lot named they call him Hollywood Smothers. His name is Dalen. He's a really good running back. He was another guy that I considered in this list as well. But there's a lot of backs. The kid that's replacing Ashton, I'm completely Ashton
Genty.
Ashton Genty. I was kept saying with Gillette. I don't know why I was going there. I was like, am I having a stroke right now? But Ashton Genty's an outstanding running back. USC's got a couple transfers that are going to be interesting to see. Boston College has a running back that's coming back named Turbo. They got some great names that Notre Dame faces this year at running back. NC State's got a kid named Hollywood Smothers, and Boston College has a running back named Turbo Richard coming back next year. They also have Jordan McDonald. So there's a lot of quality running backs on the schedule this year, Trev, that Notre Dame's going to have to face. And I didn't even mention like Alex Tezka, who comes back. I like the 2 kids at Stanford. I didn't consider them, Chris Davis, and I'm drawing a blank on the other kid's name from Stanford right now, who actually Micah Ford, because their offensive line's going to be so bad. Mm-hmm. That's what kept them off my consideration list. But looking at all those backs, a lot of good backs on the board this year, Trev, that Notre Dame's going to have to face. But I think it was an easy decision for me to have Le'Veon Moss number 1 and Desmond Reed number 2.
Yeah, you and I see that the same. It was a very easy choice for my first. When you texted me that over last night, I immediately threw it into my notes. Lauren and I were watching a movie, and I put in my notes like RB1 was Le'Veon Moss. Man, a couple weeks ago, I went through and I put in like Notre Dame opponent position groups and like their returning production, and nobody really sniffed Le'Veon Moss's production. Mark Fletcher did from a season ago. Honestly, Amari Daniels did, who also plays for Texas A&M, and then the only other one that kind of comes close, some of the Navy kids, and then the Wayman James kid who played at Hutchinson Community College. He transferred into USC. There, he had 1,600 yards, 20 touchdowns. But again, that was at the JUCO level, I believe. And so when I was looking at this list, Le'Veon Moss became the easy one, especially when you factor in what his production would have been after injury. I did float around the idea of putting Amari Daniels on like my third team or sleeper team, but I really like Mark Fletcher, but it was tough to keep Amari Daniels off there, I will say.
Yeah. The Notre Dame defense is going to face 2 good backfields and 2 good lines the first 2 weeks of the season. There's no question about that. Overall, Trev, agree. This is a strong position for Notre Dame that they're going to have to face some. I think quarterback and running back this year is much stronger week to week to week than what Notre Dame's defense faced last year.
Yes, quarterback definitely. Running back, I think it's a little bit more even because they faced some pretty good backfields last year too. But yeah, I'll say this about this year's running backs that they face.
The week. What I'm referring to is it's the week after week after week after week. Like last year, like Northern Illinois, Arterio Brown, stud. Louisville had a really good running back room. Jamal Haynes would probably be my first team running back this year. But then there's Miami of Ohio didn't have much of a running back situation. Stanford's running back situation wasn't great because of the line. You know, you just had a lot of other times where it wasn't great. Woody Marks is a very good back. To me, it's almost like every team they play each week has a good running back.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is a different challenge for Notre Dame this season.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm with you.
Receiver, polar opposite from what we just talked about with the first 2 positions.
Yeah.
Completely different.
Yeah.
I struggled to come up with 3 first-team guys. It was not easy. There were 2 guys that were easy first-team picks for me, partly because of just the lack of impact production across the board. There aren't a lot of, in my opinion, just really impact receivers. But my first 2, and we have these 2 in common, is I have Casey Concepcion, who would have faced Notre Dame either way. If he stayed at his previous school, he would have faced him when they played NC State. He transferred to Texas A&M. Now, he's coming off of a very down year, 53 catches, 460 yards, only 8.7 per catch, 6 touchdowns. The year before as a freshman, however, much better production. 71 catches, 839 yards, 11.8 per catch, 10 touchdowns. It's kind of like the argument I've used for Will Pauling. It's like I'm not punishing Will Pauling for a down year last year as much. He was injured, bad quarterback situation. I view him more as the guy we saw 2 years ago. Same thing with Kevin Concepcion. I think he struggled with some of the quarterback issues that they had last year. I think when C.J. Bailey came along, there were other guys that he liked better. They've got a very good tight end we'll be talking about here in a little bit. They had a pretty good all-around receiving core, some guys that were better downfield throwers. So his production last year is a little bit misleading. I think he gets too much hype nationally as like a top 10 national receiver. He's still a good football player. And he's certainly one of the 2 best receivers that I have on the board. And then, of course, and probably my top receiver on the board is Mekhi Lemon. And it's not just because of what he did to Notre Dame. His numbers won't blow you away. 52 catches, 764 yards, 3 touchdowns. This is an offense that spread the ball around a lot last year. So there was nobody that had just dominant numbers across the board for USC last year. But I thought Mekhi Lemon was their most impressive looking receiver. There were other guys that had more catches. Obviously, they've got a guy coming back, Jacoby Lane, who had more touchdowns. Actually, nobody had more catches in yards than Mekhi Lemon, but more touchdowns. There were some guys who had bigger moments in certain games, but I also look at Mekhi Lemon as he had 2 games where he didn't catch a ball because of injury. And later in the year, if you look at his numbers like the first 5 games, he caught 7 passes. for, let's see, 45, 82 yards. First 5 games, 7 catches for 85 yards. All his production, and he finished the year with 52 catches for 764 yards and 3 touchdowns. All of that came in the last 8 games of the season. He had several good performances. He had 6 catches for 73 yards against Penn State, 4 for 134 against Rutgers, 8 for 70 in the touchdown against Washington, 2 for 69 against UCLA, 9 for 133 against Notre Dame. He was giving Notre Dame slot receivers work. That was by far the least productive game Jordan Clark had all year. He was torching Jordan Clark and Christian Gray in that game. And then he had 6 catches for 99 yards against Texas A&M in the bowl game. So I think that production we saw from Makai Lemon translates to this season, and he becomes more of the number one for them. Like, I think their first 2 guys are going to be a lot more productive individually than they were last year because there's not as much other targets to spread the ball around to because there's no Deuce Robinson, there's no Kyron Hudson, there's no Zachariah Branch. The running backs are still going to get their touches, but I think you're going to see more of the production centered around the 2 receivers we're going to talk about in Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane, who I know you'll talk more about. But those are my first 2. My third I had a tougher time with, Trev, because there's some quality receivers there, but it requires projection for anybody else who you're going to have on there. I went with Lewis Bond from Boston College, who I like. I like Lewis Bond a lot. He's a proven player. He caught 67 passes for 689 yards last year. He had 52 catches for 646 yards the year before that. So he's got 2 years of good production. The quarterback situation was not great last year at Boston College, but I thought he settled in, finished the year well, put up some good numbers late in the year, had some good numbers against some quality opponents last season. But he's a guy that I watch. I think he can work the quick game. He's a good route runner. He's got strong hands. And I think that with a more traditional quarterback, especially if Dylan Lonergan wins the job, I think you're going to see a guy like Lewis Bond put up some really good numbers this year. So that's my first team: Makai Lemon, Lewis Bond, Kevin Concepcion. If I had to go with somebody else, I actually would have gone with Eli Heidenreich, who I think is an outstanding player. I actually strongly considered putting him on my first team. You're talking about a guy last year that was over 1,000 yards of total offense for Navy last season. He's a guy that, as a slot receiver, had 39 catches for 671 yards and 6 touchdowns. Also had 65 carries for 444 yards and 3 touchdowns. So you talk about his total offensive production last season. We're talking about the guy that had 1,169 total yards on 114 touches and 9 touchdowns. You're touching the ball 90 times and you're averaging over 10 yards a touch. You're a good football player. I thought about him, but just projecting forward, I just think those other 3 guys are going to be more productive and are more impactful as actual receivers, where with Eli, you had to kind of put some of the run game stuff into that a little bit. But I thought about putting Eli on my first team, but I ended up going with those 3. I know you and I have two of the 3 the same. Trev, let's talk about your first team.
Yep. So my first team, I also have Makai Lemon on there for all the reasons that Brian talked about. I also have KC Concepcion on there for all the reasons that Brian talked about. Last little nugget I'll add, I think Colin Klein's going to do a lot of fun things with him, with that style of offense, with Marcel Reed, that offensive line coming back. I think you're going to see Concepcion get different types of touches. I think you're going to see him on some end around, some touch passes. I think he's going to be a kind of their gadget tool in the offense because he can do a lot of different things. And so that's where I think you're going to see him. My third guy was Jacoby Lane from USC. I've been very bullish this offseason. I do believe that USC is going to have the best receiving core from top to bottom that Notre Dame is going to face. And
that's going to be an interesting debate, by the way.
Yeah. I go back and I look at what Jacoby Lane did a season ago. He's 6'4". He's a $195. He had 43 receptions, 525 yards, averaged 12.2 yards per catch, and he had 12 touchdowns. He's shown that he can be a red zone issue. He caught 3
in the
passes.
Last 2 games, by the way.
Yeah.
6 against Texas A&M and Notre Dame. 6 touchdowns.
Yep. So he's been able to perform in big moments. He had 3 catches in the game against Notre Dame. All of them went for touchdowns.
For 26 yards. But yes, they were still
went for touchdowns.
And they were clutch moments. They weren't like it was late in the game when they were down by 4 touchdowns. Correct.
Yep. Absolutely. So I like the compliment that he and Makai Lemon bring. Makai Lemon, he's more of the downfield threat. He's 5'11". He's a little bit more shifty, can do a little bit more after the catch. Jacoby Lane's at 6'4", $195 boundary receiver. So I like that compliment. He was my last addition to the first team. And then on second team, I know, Brian, you mentioned Lewis Bond at Boston College. I was real close going back and forth between him and Jacoby Lane. That was one of the harder decisions I had to make between who do I put on first team and who do I put on second team. It was very close.
Because you're one guy's got the volume, every down volume. The other guy has the size and the touchdown production. And when you're looking at Jacoby Lane, Trev, I would have not had an issue. I'm not pushing back on that one because I think because a lot of this we're doing is projection.
Yeah.
I think this guy's going to do this, and I think this guy's going to do this season. As I said before, I think a lot of the production for USC is going to get sort of focused more on 2 guys compared to 6. Now, there'll still be options 3, 4, and 5, and there'll be other guys getting plenty of touches, but it's not going to be as spread out as it was a year ago.
Yep.
And that's what I look at. So I have no problem with that. My other third team guy or second team guy, Trev, was a receiver from Syracuse. It's a guy that I think is going to have a breakout season, partly because he's kind of the last man standing, and that's Darryl Gill. I thought he was a good player for them last year. He was sort of their number 4 option. Actually, you could even say he was their number 5 option when you look at how many balls their running back caught last season. But Darryl Gill's a tall kid from Texas, got some speed, some vertical speed, tall, skinny kid, had 31 catches for 570 yards and 2 touchdowns last year as a sophomore. And I thought he was a guy that ended the season really well because the majority of his production came in the last 3 games. He had 9 catches for 185 yards against UConn, and he had 4 catches for 145 yards in the bowl game against Washington State. So he's a guy that I look at and say, I think he is going to become much more of a focal point in an offense that no longer has a Rondé Gadsden, no longer has Trevor Pena, no longer has Jackson Meeks. He becomes that guy for them. He's not going to be completely alone. They got Jonte Cook in the portal, so he'll have some talent to take some of the pressure off. But I think he's going to be I could see him being a guy that catches like 40 balls for almost 700, 800 yards and be a good football player minimum next season. There's some other receivers we like. I can't wait for us to talk about the best receiving cores that Notre Dame's going to face this year, because the team that people are going to be surprised by that we're going to talk about is Boston College. They've got another tall kid that's on my sleeper list that I thought about putting in my second team. I know you did, Trev, and that's Reed Harris. You and I were texting about this last night. Like, dude, Boston College has a sneaky good receiving core. Big play guy. And then I like Noah Rogers, former big-time recruit from NC State. I think he takes a step up as sort of a go-to guy this season for NC State. I think he could have a big year. I think I could look back at this list, and if there's one guy that I'm going to look back and be like, I screwed up not putting him on my first or second team, my prediction is it's going to be Noah Rogers. Loved him coming out of high school, went to Ohio State, transferred back to NC State, really talented player. And then the last guy that's on my list is I could see JoJo Trader having a bit of a breakout for Miami this season. I could see him end up becoming Miami's top pass catcher. I'm not quite ready to go all in on JoJo Trader yet, but he's a talented kid, another 6'1", had a nice touchdown catch in the bowl game. There's some good receivers on the board, but there's a lot of need for breakouts. And we're having to do a ton of projection with this group because the production is not there with most of these guys. A lot of this is projection, but there is some talented guys that were a lot of height and vertical speed on the schedule this year that Notre Dame's going to face, but just a lot of unpolished aspects of that.
Yeah, what you were bringing up about your regret of, maybe if there was a guy that you didn't leave on the first or second team you wish you would have. I feel that way a little bit because of what my ranking was at quarterback about one of the pick guys, Kenny Johnson specifically. Last season he had 46 receptions, 537 yards, 3 touchdowns. But with him, it would, again, be a little bit more projection. He only I don't want to say only, but only average 11.7 yards per catch. That's going to need to take a bump. I wonder how much his numbers were hindered by some of Eli Holstein's injuries down the stretch of the season. But he was somebody that I debated about putting on there. But the rest of my second team, it's Lewis Bond that I have on there. I have Latrell Caples at Boise State. He's now their kind of go-to guy, especially with Prince Strachan transferring out. I think Prince Strachan went to USC.
Yeah,
And
he
then the
did.
other guy that I have on there is another Boston College guy. It's I have Reed Harris and Lewis Bond on there. And Reed Harris, he's another really interesting guy. He's 6'5". He's almost 230 pounds. He had 17 catches last year, but 486 yards, 4 touchdowns. He averaged 28.6 yard per catch. And so, to Brian's point, there's a lot of length, a lot of downhill speed, a lot of size on Notre Dame's kind of docket for who they play at receiver this year. So it's going to be interesting.
Let's go tight end, Trev. We had the same first and second team tight ends. We just had them flipped. My first team tight end is Justin Jolly from NC State. My second team tight end was Matt Lauder from Boise State, and I had a very tough time picking between the two. They're polar opposites of tight end in how they look and how they play, but their usage is similar. Justin Jolly is more of sort of like that H-back type of tight end. You know, he's not going to, you know, you stand him next to Eli Raridan and they're going to look very different. Whereas Matt Lauder is going to look a lot more like Eli Raridan in certain ways. But Justin Jolly's a kid also that's part of my thing with some of these guys that I look at, Trev, is I do think CJ Bailey's going to be really good this year. Justin Jolly last year was led second on the team in catches last year at Boston College with 40, or NC State with 43. Led the team with 661 yards, 15.4 per catch. Second on the team in touchdowns. Losing Concepcion might hurt him a little bit if they weren't, and they also lost Dakari Collins, but they've got Noah Rogers coming back. Wesley Grimes comes back. Hollywood Smothers caught some balls out of the backfield. They had 2 young receivers that I think are going to really step in. NC State's got a sneaky good group of pass catchers coming back this year. Really sneaky good. And Justin Jolly's the most known of that group of tight end. Very productive player last season. And then there's Matt Lauder at Boise State, who's the number 2 receiver for Boise last year, both catches, yards, led the team in touchdowns. The thing about him, Trev, is you know, he's not super tall, but he's really long. And it makes him look a little bit taller than he is. I think he's like 6'3", 6'4", 240, 250. But he's got really long arms, catches the ball extremely well. What I liked about him is he was very good he was one of the best players Penn State or Boise had against Penn State. Penn State had a very tough time with him in that game. Working the middle of the field, working the vertical stuff. I think he's a guy that's one of the better tight ends I've seen on film as I look around the country. Those 2 players, I think there's a big drop off after that. There's some solid tight ends on there. My sleeper tight end is Jeremiah Franklin from BC. He was part of a 2-man tight end rotation last year, where a lot of the production was kind of split between him and Kamari Morales, who had 28 catches. Jeremiah had 27. Kamari had 325 yards. Jeremiah had 311. Kamari had 6 touchdowns. Jeremiah had 3. As sort of like this, it looked a lot like the receivers or the 2 tight end units that Mike Denbrock used to have at Cincinnati. But with Kamari Morales gone, I think Jeremiah Franklin takes on a bunch of that production this season. They move him around a lot. They'll line him up in the slot, outside, do all that. I think he's a guy that has a chance for a big jump this year. But I still think those 2 guys are head and shoulders above everybody else.
Yeah, you and I see that the same. I had a really hard time. Before I sent you over my list, I flipped him twice. Well, I was like, nah, it's Justin Jolly. I was like, nah, it's Matt Lauder. I kept going back and forth. And the thing that separated for me, you highlighted it, was Matt Lauder's performance in the Penn State game. Because they are very similar. Matt Lauder 6'3", 240. Justin Jolly, I think, is 6'3", 235. Very similar production. Matt Lauder had a couple more touchdowns, but then I start looking at Matt Lauder's experience in big games, and his production in those big games. Against Penn State, he had 4 for 96 and a touchdown. Against UNLV in the conference championship, he had 5 for 62. And in the regular season, he had 4 for 38 and a touchdown against them as well. And, I go and I compare that to what Justin Jolly did. He put up good numbers as well.
He also, real quick, Matt Lauder had 4 catches for 96 yards against Washington State last year as well.
Yeah. Yep. And 2 touchdowns. And so, when I look at his production in some of the bigger games that Boise State played in, that kind of weighed in for me. But what set it over the top was definitely the Penn State game. But I am on board with everything that you said about Justin Jolly at NC State. My sleeper tight end, because there was such a big drop off, this is a big projection for me, but I went with Lake McCree, the tight end at USC. We talked a lot about the benefit of Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane reeking from Zachariah Brandt's leaving, Deuce Robinson, Kyron Hudson. I think Lake McCree is going to reap some of those benefits as well. He just wasn't as involved in some of their offensive game plan last season because they had 6 mouths to feed in the receiving core.
Yeah.
Now I think he takes a big step up, but it is a projection because last season he was either very involved. Against LSU, he had 5 for 56. And against UCLA, he had 2 for 36. And then against Michigan, he had 3 for -3. Against Notre Dame, he had 1 catch for 2 yards. And so it's just so polar opposite with him. I want to see what it's going to be like, but it wouldn't surprise me if this was a miss on my end with the projection aspect of him putting as a sleeper.
I think he could play really well this year and still not be on the same level as those other 2 guys. I think those are 2. I mean, and Justin Jolly's might be a guy that's he's getting looked at as preseason All-American type of projection by some. Certainly all ACC projection. Let's move to the offensive line as we wrap up the offense, Trevor. Tackle was not as easy as you'd think. There were 3 guys that I thought all had an opportunity, and that's why I said, honestly, if I was doing just any offensive lineman, not position specific, I might have my first and second team tackles on there. And my first team tackles, I ended up going with Cage Casey from Boise State, who's an outstanding player. I went back and watched the film of him against Penn State, and just 6'5", 315. He was steady in that game against some very good defensive ends. Yeah, there's a couple times Abdul Carter, got him, or denied Dennis Sutton got him, but he had way more wins in that game than you'd think a guy from Boise State would have. He was outstanding. Not an elite athlete, but a solid athlete, moves real clean and crisp, strong hands, good football player. And then my other first team tackle, and it actually works out perfectly because Cage Casey plays left tackle, and Francis Maya-Noah, we finally got that right. We did some research on that. I got that way wrong. I just assumed that a G sounded like a G, not an N. But hey, it is what it is. But Francis Maya-Noah, it was my other first team tackle. He's a right tackle at Miami. So it actually is left and right. So it worked out perfectly. I strongly considered Trey Zune, who was outstanding for Texas A&M last year. I just think these 2 kids are a step ahead of him. I just do. I mean, I tried to talk myself into Trey Zune just because I'm trying to be objective and not just go with who everybody, the national people have those 2 guys as first team. I wanted to really look at it. But just as good as Trey Zune was, those are 2 of the very best tackles in all of college football that they're going to face this season. So I went with those guys first team, Trey Zune second team. There's a big drop-off between him and who's next at offensive tackle. My pick is a projection. It's Elijah Page.
Yep.
He's got a lot of talent. Loved him coming out of high school. And I love the fact that he's got great size and length, and he had some moments last year he was pretty good, and some moments he was pretty bad. I'm projecting that now that he's got a year of he was a true sophomore last year as well. But now that he's got a year of experience under his belt, I'm projecting a much better season for him than he had last year, and I think that puts him above the others. There's some other guys. Markel Bell was the guy that I considered. There's not a lot of great tackles coming back after that to as you look at it. But the top is as good. I mean, that's as good of a first-team pairing with Maya-Noah and Casey as Notre Dame has on its schedule at any position this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. What Cage Casey was able to do all last season, I mean, you're talking about a team that played in their conference championship. They played in the first round of the playoffs. He didn't allow a single sack all season long. That's impressive. I really liked what I saw from Cage Casey. I'm with you on where all the other tackles are. I believe you and I have that the same because my first team tackles are also Francis Maya-Noah and Cage Casey. My second team is Trey Zune from Texas A&M and Elijah Page. So you and I see that very much the same. It was a struggle to find the fourth. I'm with you. I went with Elijah Page as well because of how high of a ceiling that he has. But it was difficult for me because, we talked a lot about how good the offensive lines are going to be for Miami and how good they're going to be for Texas A&M. A lot of that lies on the interior, which we are getting ready to talk about. But I am going to be interested to see how the rest of that pans out. But I know in the trenches, especially on offense relative, we have very similar picks here.
At guard, Trev, I think were we the same there as well? We had same guards, correct? Or did you have
Armaj Reed Adams and DJ?
Yeah, we were different. So the one guy we had in common is Armaj Reed Adams. And I'll be honest with you, Trev, I thought hard about putting Chase Basantis on the first team over Armaj. And the reason I'm with Armaj Reed Adams is because he's more of the known, consistent commodity. Played a whole season last year. He was solid all year. He's not a dynamic player. He's not a road grader. He's just a good player that gets the job done every snap. That's really what it boils down to for me is that. And Chase Basantis, however, was more inconsistent, but when he was on, he was more dominant. He was banged up a little bit last year. This is one of those ones where I'm going to look back and be like, hold on, you had a different A&M guard on the first team than Chase Basantis. Like, that's what I think we're going to look back and see. But it's going to require projection. So I went with more of the known commodity for me. The Fernando Carmona projection or pick is a little bit interesting because he played tackle for Arkansas last year and was not a good tackle. But he was a really dynamic run defender when they were running, when he was down blocking, and he just wasn't great in space and wasn't good in pass pro. Big, massive kid, though. They moved him inside to guard at Arkansas. They actually took both of their tackles and moved him into guard this year. And then they got the kid that started at left tackle for Georgia Tech last year, transferred to Arkansas. So I really like Carmona at guard. Now, this is a projection because I'm projecting him a position he didn't play last year. But when you look at him, when he's asked to play in tight quarters and just be a dominant run blocker, he was pretty good for Arkansas last year. So I projected it a little bit on that one, but I like him there. And I didn't want to have two A&M guys in the first team. So if I'm going with two projection guys, I'm going to go with the guy that's got a little bit more experience on him. But I also consider DJ Wingfield, who is my other second-team guard. He's a transfer from Purdue who's going to USC. But again, he's got to be more consistent. In my view, I don't know how much of that was just being a part of a bad team. Like, those are things that we look at. So those are my two guards.
Yeah, fair enough. Where it came down to me, because I have the only ones that I have flipped, I have DJ Wingfield on my first team and Fernando Carmona from Arkansas as my second. And it's going to take projection for both. With DJ Wingfield, was Purdue just that bad? And Fernando Carmona, it's like, okay, how are you going to handle the adjustment from tackle to guard? Like we talked about on the show, there's a lot of teams, there's a lot of players that can make that transition. Notre Dame specifically recruits a lot of tackles that have the ability to play both. I just don't know that much about Fernando Carmona to say, oh, well, Charles Jagasaw did it, so I think that Carmona could also do it. You know what I mean? So I went back and I looked at what DJ Wingfield did because Purdue was so bad last year. And in some of the bigger games that they played, it wasn't, I mean, he only allowed one pressure against Oregon, no sacks, one hit on the quarterback, not great. He ended the season with 3 hits and 3 sacks on the quarterback. Didn't allow a sack against Oregon or Ohio State, allowed 1 against Penn State, didn't allow any against Indiana either. And so I look at that and I am going to give enough projection that I do believe that him playing around a better offense, maybe a more mobile-ish quarterback. I'm willing to say that Jade Maeva is a more mobile guy than what Hudson Card was for Purdue. That could help out some of his numbers as well. But I think being surrounded by better talent is going to carry him a little bit.
Center Mason Randolph is my pick for Boise State. He was banged up a lot last year, played early, missed the whole season, came back. I thought he struggled a little bit in the Penn State game, which was sort of my hesitation of putting him on the first team over James Brockermeyer. But when I went back and looked at his film pre-injury, he's a pretty good player. And I'm projecting him forward as a team that's going to still want to run the football. He's an athletic kid, physical kid. I think he's the guy that I project. James Brockermeyer is my second team center. James is the most steady of the two. Like, no question. He's been a steady player. His dad played college football. His brother played at Alabama. His brother was a big-time recruit. He played at Texas as well. His brother played Texas. He was committed to Alabama. I don't know. He was, you know how those things go. But I like James Brockermeyer, steady player, consistent. He was solid for TCU last year, transfers to Miami. He's now going to be the starter at Miami. He's the easy pick for me. He would have been the easy pick. I went with the projection, though. I like Mason Randolph a lot. And even though he struggled, he was leaning too much. He was kind of getting out of his, ahead of himself. He'd lose his balance against Penn State. But when he came off with a good base, he could move the Penn State guards off the line or defensive tackles off the line. So I saw some really good things. So I'm going with, now that he's healthy, got a full season under his belt, I think he's going to be their best center. Had James Brockermeyer second. The sleeper for me is Mark Naboo And the reason I couldn't put him on there is because he may not even start for A&M. He was going to be their starting center last year, got hurt, and then the guy that replaced him is coming back. So I don't know for a fact that Naboo is going to start for them this year. If he does, means he beat out a returning starter. He could end up skyrocketing up this list and end up being first team by the end of the year on this list. But he was a guy. USC had a transfer from Syracuse, who's a solid player. I'm not quite. I watched his film, Trev. He was steady. There was just nothing I loved about him. But like, it's kind of the point you made with DJ Wingfield and a different system. How's he going to fit into that with different players around him, bigger players around him? How's he going to do? But I'm going with Mason Randolph. Lindy Sports, their first team All ACC center was Zach Rice. I got a big kick out of that. Because like this dude couldn't earn more than 40 snaps in 3 years at North Carolina. But he's going to go to Syracuse and be a first team All ACC player. What are you talking about?
Yeah, you and I were texting about that one. That one,
like, seriously, like, are you just going off recruiting rankings at this point in time?
Probably. You and I had the same centers. We just flipped them. I had James Brockermeyer as the first, and literally the only thing that set him aside for me was that consistency piece. He started all 12 games for TCU in the regular season. Didn't give up a lot. I think he gave up 9 total pressures all season.
And I think 4 of them came in one game against Baylor.
Yeah.
Like, he just had that bad game.
Yep.
And even in that game, I went back and watched it, and he wasn't getting destroyed. A couple times he got driven off the line. He got, guy had a really nice swim move on him one time. He was still solid. He's as steady as you're going to see. It's just, there's nothing dynamic about him. He's not going to blow you off the ball and dominate. But he's just going to, he's that guy we used to play, and when we were in high school playing like pickup basketball, and there's like that real kind of like nerdy looking guy that's not super athletic, but he's like, his dad's like a basketball coach, and he's not real talented, but he's got perfect technique, and he's like, beating you to spots and you can't get around. I'm like, dude, what's going on right now? Like, how is this kid like D'ing me up right now? But then you figure it out, and but then other guys who are more athletic than I was, or more natural basketball players, are going to tear him up. You know what I mean? Like, that's James Brockermeyer. Dad played the position, brother played the position. He's just real steady.
Yeah.
And that's why I totally understand having him on the first team. I just think Randolph can be more dominant.
Sure.
If he can be more consistent. That was my projection. But if it's off on who's the better player today, I'm okay going with Brockermeyer.
I get that completely. But yep, that's my first team all opponent offense, first and second team.
Now let's do this before we move on to the defense. One thing we like to do is, where would Notre Dame players fit in this mix? So how I look at it is, it's basically looking at creating the list as if we considered not just the 12 teams, but the 12 teams plus Notre Dame. So it's now 13 teams in the mix. And here's what I had. And I had a tough time with this one, Trevor, very tough time with this one. And I tried to be as much as I could a non-homer. There were some that were easy, though. And on offense and defense, the easy one on offense is Jeremiah Love, a running back. Yeah. Love Le'Veon Moss. He's not as good as Jeremiah Love. And even in the matchup against each other, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price outplayed Le'Veon Moss. Mm-hmm. You could make a case for Jadarian being your second team back, but I'm still going Le'Veon because I think Le'Veon's going to have a very good season this year for A&M. That was so I still have Horvath at quarterback. I don't have a lot of guys that have never played. I don't have any guys that have never played on my list. So I did not consider CJ Carr, just because we've never seen the kid throw a pass in college football. So he's not even on my list. But Jeremiah Love is on my list. The other one is, I had Jaden Greathouse and Malachi Fields at receiver. Greathouse is the second one. Fields is the first one on my list, because Fields is more proven over a period of time. Fields is the easiest one to get. He's the best receiver on the board. If you look at past production plus size, traits, and future projection, he's number one. And then Mekhi Lemon is number two. I went with Greathouse over Concepcion just because I think he's he's just a better athlete, in my opinion. He's stronger, and he's more impactful in some of the bigger moments, and he can do more down the field than Concepcion. And I know that Concepcion's numbers 2 years ago were better. They're from the same grade, but I think Jaden Greathouse is just the better talent. And we started to see that at times last year, and I'm projecting that Jaden's going to be a very good player. If you want to have Concepcion on there over Jaden Greathouse, I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm pretty confident in saying that if I could pick between the two, if I was building a Notre Dame team and I could pick between the two, I'm going with Jaden Greathouse over Kevin Concepcion and Louis Bond, who are both – they're all very similar players in how they play.
Honestly,
I think Greathouse is just bigger and stronger and better.
Yeah, up to the – did you have anybody else on offense?
Yeah, I just want skill guys first.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, we see that the same. I didn't put any weight into anybody that hadn't played yet. So I had Jeremiah Love on there. I had Malachi Fields on there. I had Greathouse on there. And for skill guys, I think that was it. I did think about putting Jadarian Price on my second team, though.
Yeah, so we're the same there. Offensive line, I had a tough time because I'm trying not to project too much. And I wanted to put Charles Jaggis on my first team, but I just couldn't do it because we're talking about a guy that's literally has 2 career starts over the course of 2 seasons. I do have him on my second team. My first team player from Notre Dame on the offensive line is Billy Schrauth.
Yep.
I took off Fernando Carmona, put on Billy Schrauth. I think Billy's just the more talented player. He's not as big as Fernando, but he's just a better player, better athlete. And has played guard where Carmona is making that transition. I really thought about putting Charles Jagusah, and I won't be shocked at all if both Jagusah and Schrauth are on my first team by the end of the year. But I just need – it's like with a lot of things. I just need to see Charles do it for more than a couple games to put him on there. But it was hurt because I think he might be the most talented interior offensive lineman on the board, and I don't know that it's close. And the only guy that's really close talent-wise is Billy Schrauth. But it's just that's a big jump from 2 career starts to first team all opponent. So like I said, I tried to take my homer hat off on that one and be objective about it. And then the other offensive lineman I have Emil Wagner, second team, and it's not close. Emil Wagner's a good football player. But again, guys, Cage Casey and Francis Mauanoa are 2 of the best tackles in all of college football. They are elite offensive tackles. And Emil is very good, but he's going to have to – if Emil Wagner is in the same conversation at the end of the year with those 2 kids, he's probably done at Notre Dame after 2025. He's probably going to the first round of the NFL draft next year. Like, that's how good those 2 guys are. Emil could be a second-team All-American and be second-team All-American because those are the 2 first-team All-Americans. Like, that's how good, in my opinion, Cage Casey and that's his brother, Francis Mauanoa are at tackle.
We have the same offensive lineman. I took out DJ Wingfield on my first team, and I slid in Billy Schrauth, and then I took Elijah Page out of my second team and put it in Emil Wagner. We see that the same.
Yeah. I could see Ashton Craig jumping into this list as well, but again, we're talking about a guy that's coming off of a knee injury that started 3 games last year. Like, if he would be my sleeper over Mark Naboo when we put all these guys together.
Fair.
Because I think he could – because I thought Ashton was playing very good football when he got hurt.
Yeah.
He was pretty good against – he had the one bad hold, but the hold was like 4 or 5 yards downfield. It was just unnecessary. He was dominating the guy. So he's there. So that's the offensive list, Trev. You got 4 Notre Dame guys on the first team list. If you look at the total numbers of – you take the Notre Dame players off, I had 3 players from Texas A&M on my first team. And what's interesting is the team that I had next is Boise. I had 2 guys from Boise on my list. I had 1 player from Navy, 1 player from USC, 1 player from NC State, 1 player from Miami, 1 player from Arkansas. That was my first team offense, was made up that way.
Nice. Yep. Yeah, I had 3 from Texas A&M. I had 3 from USC. I had 2 from Boise, and then 1 from Pitt, 2 from Miami. So, yep.
So that's the offensive breakdown. We're going to go to defense next, folks. But before we do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Let us know what you guys think. If you're going to say, I wouldn't have this guy on there, then tell us who you would have on there. That's kind of what makes it fun, as opposed to saying, I think you're nuts for having those 2 guys on there. Give us who you would have on there. That makes for a good case, because with a lot of these, Trev, there is debate to be had. We have it, and some of them we're not even super comfortable with the ones we have, because there's so much there's a lot of similarities between certain players, and that's part of the fun. So we like to hear your picks as well. If you want to disagree with ours, that's also part of the fun. Just let us know who you would have instead and why, and make your case, which, again, we never know. We might be persuaded. So you can do all that. But of course, as always, folks, make sure you are checking us out and you are members of the premium board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.